What the flock? That's right, what the flock is going on in the world. This is a weekly commentary show presented by the Peace Genesis Project, and we'll discuss anything from the battle of the sexes to the history and destiny of earthly humanity. I'm Adrienne Metcalf. I'll be joined by my husband, Josh Schwartzbach, and believe it or not, we'll also be joined by non-physical consciousness we call SOTU, who's outside of time and space. Whether we ruffle your feathers or soothe your soul, we hope you comment, and then next week we'll address some of those comments.
Hello, I'm Josh.
And I'm Adrienne.
And this is our first What the Flock? A metaphysical look at the reflections of today and maybe even tomorrow. It's our intention in this show to give you a viewpoint that is perhaps a little bit beyond the ones that you're normally used to getting. I've been a channel of an energy that we call SOTU for way over 20 years now, and they've been regularly kind of kicking us in the butt, Adrienne especially,
Yes.
For that period of time, in which we have learned a certain way of understanding how everything is working and how everything is purposeful. And we hope to give you a perhaps somewhat amusing, if that's possible, with the subjects that we're faced with these days, a somewhat amusing and ironic understanding of the directions that our world is taking. So, today we're going to, and on most weeks, we're going to try to cover at least two reflections of the reality of our world. And so we're going to begin today, which is the 21st day of February in 2018, with what, Adrienne?
Well, we have a group on Facebook because this is a production of the Peace Genesis Project that's geared towards understanding peace and how we're going to get there. And it's been said that the times of crisis are also the greatest times of opportunity for positive change. So the question that was put to the Facebook group this week was, are we victims or are we creators?
Well, and that came from a discussion that we had. We have most mornings around these questions, around these understandings that we call the Breakfast Club. And, because I've been a channel for so long, sometimes things will pop into my head and out of my mouth before I even know what they were intended. It's part of the, what shall we say, the difficulties of being a channel. And so, come on, you're all supposed to feel sorry for me now.
I couldn't.
Right. So
well, we are on the subject of victimization, aren't we?
Well, but we are, aren't we? So we just kind of flow right into that dynamic, because that's ultimately the question was all around the reflections of gender that we have been questioning lately, and the roles of gender in our world, and the specifics around those dynamics. And so I had been thinking about the Me Too movement, and certainly do understand the amount of outrage and the what shall we say, righteousness of the whole movement. However, there is also the dynamic it had me considering. Is this a dynamic of victimization? And certainly you would have to say that it was, wouldn't you?
There is a level of victimization that has happened just because of the belief systems in our society. Many belief systems we've held and not questioned for thousands of years, and maybe they had a purpose for being there, but they certainly have defined gender as having certain roles and certain expectations that we might question now. For instance, the domination by the male of the female is certainly a level of victimization. the expectation that the male would be willing to give up its life for the female is also up for grabs
so in that
right now.
so in that circumstance, would you not say that that is a dynamic where everyone is being victimized by the paradigm in its own way? Now, that is not to say there is not the whole dynamic of better than or less than in that whole thing and the whole movement along those ways. And
Well, it's just easier
well,
in many ways.
but again, if we are willing to look at the dynamics as in the place of human history, within the context of human history, if we're able to look at it along those lines, it begins to make much more sense. When the Donald first came into around, I said, "Wow, this guy is a throwback to my father." And so that was really the truth. My father was just as sexist. My father was just as boorish. My father was all of these things, and it was coming from that same sort of New York, New Jersey sort of background that kind of bred that sort of crassness. And again, we're each a product of our environment.
So the product can be understood when you start to look at the factors and the influences that have created us, but we have this opportunity now to question and change some of these beliefs, and by even beginning to understand how the other half lives and what that experience is, can lead to the opportunity for some compassion and maybe even healing and maybe even forgiveness after that, because in fact it's very hard to heal. It's very hard to forgive if you're still in pain, if you're still re-experiencing the wounds, and then if you're in pain, the outrage seems appropriate, but there needs to be a step beyond that.
Well, and again, first it's the dynamic. You can't jump to the end, unfortunately. And I know that there is that desire that once we have the realization of the problem, that we try to immediately jump to the end. But I would put forward the idea that most folks are just becoming aware of these dynamics within themselves, and realization that you have a choice to, and again, you have to look at the reflections that reality are giving us. And one of the reflections is around these dynamics and around these repetitive dynamics. And this is going to be a seamless transition. I want you to notice that.
Okay.
But again, we have these repetitive dynamics that keep coming up in our world that are really clearly a message from our soul, our collective soul, as well as our individual soul. And you can't get any clearer example of that dynamic than the recent school shootings.
Yes, horrendous, incredible level.
Well, but again, I would look at that dynamic, and you'd have to go all the way back to the beginning of those school shootings, which were years and years ago, and the repetitive dynamic that keeps happening. And it seems like, that's what we used to call Ezekiel's wheel back in the day. If you have something in the dynamics of your reality that your soul is asking you, that growth is asking you to deal with, then those situations are going to keep coming back with increasing intensity until you deal with them. And I would say that this dynamic that is happening with the school shootings is clearly a dynamic, a dynamic that is being asked for you to deal with.
Well, we have talked about SOTU, the consciousness that Josh channels, has said that an advanced civilization measures itself by how the least of its participants are doing, not how the best are. And when I look at this in light of the school shooting, there's two faces to that. There's, of course, the children who were killed, and adults, that they are the least of society in that they need the most care and nurture and direction. And that includes also the shooter, because he was truly damaged. He was truly
Wasn't
hurting.
he a child also?
He was
19 years old, and you do not learn discernment until you're at least 25 years old. And they say men might be even a little longer than that. Women are 25 years old. Well, again, here we have a situation where if you look at the dynamic of gender, that comes into play, because in the dynamics of school shooters, you will find out that they were all male. There are not any female mass murderers. Well, there may be mass murderers, but not in a school shooting type of situation. So that is one part of the dynamic, and that part can be explained by the fact, simply in the gender situation, that women have menses and men do not. And in this society, the society that exists in your world right now in America, there are no templates of masculinity. There are no rites of passage. There are no expectations of responsibility put upon the male, with its increasing levels of maturity and its ability to impregnate. Let's say it, let's call it what it is. It's that dynamic of that maturation and being able to deal with the dynamic of masculinity and testosterone. A woman will deal with it because she has to go through the rite of passage of her menses. Would you agree with that?
Well, they only, yes, there is certainly levels of responsibility for physicality that come to bear as
It's
soon
really
as...
hard for me to do this and not have SOTU bleed through, I have to tell you.
Well, just stay here for right now.
I'm doing that. I'm just telling you. So if you sense a little accent in the voice, they're right there.
Well, we'll get into that by the end of the show. They'll get a chance to talk to you directly. So, but for now, yes, women are faced with certain levels of physical responsibility because of menses, because of that first experience with bleeding every month, and the responsibilities of child care potential. There's a level of...
There's that whole dynamic of giving birth and all of that comes into play with the whole thing. And so you have to, that's deep, that's reality. Come home to roost.
Yes, and the only route that's really given
for the masculine doesn't have that.
Well, the only route that's given is that the masculine is told to go out and kill other people through the form
That's later
of war.
on. That's later on. These dynamics, I believe, they're formed in one's early adolescence. That certain patterns and certain understandings are created, again, I say, we're all a product of our reality. So, whatever was taught to us in those times, I've talked to so many people over the years that, they're still, their ideas of love and romance and sexuality and all of that really were formed when they were 12, 13, 14 years old, and they haven't changed really much since then. So, and in a way, isn't that the dynamic that's being asked of our entire society, of our entire reality, to be able to realize that we've been in a time of adolescence, that we tend to look at things, the whole world, but certainly in America, because that's who we're dealing with primarily, those Americans. Now, certainly this may get out to Europe and to other things, and that would be really cool in the long run. But basically, for right now, what we're trying to do is give you an understanding that there's a movement behind this whole thing, that even those that think that they're controlling things in our reality are really not. There's always that piece of the dynamic of the unexpected that comes from out of the blue, that is occurring more and more as a reflection in our world right now. And so as we question these dynamics around things as serious as battle of the sexes, as our reality, we must understand, we don't must, but it would serve us to understand that everything is a reflection of our belief. We either create our reality or we allow it.
So we're back to coming to the question back around of, are we victims or are we creators? And the conclusion that Josh and I came to is that we are both.
We're both.
We're
both. It depends on the time. It depends on the circumstances. Just like everything else, the world is complex. Our world is complex, but it's not insolvable.
And it's not beyond understanding, especially if we take into consideration the emotional part of ourselves, which is the part that we least deal with or understand because it's choppy waters.
Right. Now, we've tried not to get into any blame around this and that sort of dynamic. We'll leave that up to SOTU at the end, which is any time now, by the way.
But I just wanted, because I feel like this section is moving on, is to say that
15 minutes flies by, doesn't it?
one can be both a victim and a creator if we start to look through the lens that there has been some purpose for the victimhood.
Yeah. Well, isn't that the dynamic of the ultimate responsibility of taking of reality creation, which is basically taking full responsibility for your life, even having chosen those traumas, those melodramas, to face in order to grow, in order to become more, in order to gain experience, in order to gain wisdom, in order to gain mastery, perhaps, even.
All right.
Oh, is that an expectation on your part?
Josh is going to leave now, whether you believe it or not. Check it out.
So I have been, those of you that have seen us present in purpose. That's funny. Those of you that have seen us present in person knows that this is probably the longest that you have ever heard Josh talk through any sort of presentation like this. And I'm going to give me more opportunity to speak, although I tend to be somewhat more opinionated and perhaps a little more curmudgeonly than so too. But I'm going to move into channel right now. It's only going to take a few seconds, and hopefully you'll see the difference.
Let's just say, as he leaves and SOTU comes in, that SOTU simply describes themselves as the energy of growth, here to help us during a time of change.
All right. Well, do we smell change? Hello! We're back! Hello, everyone. We are SOTU. And this is not So Tuesday. This is what? What the flock! All right. So, Adrienne, what would you like us to speak about today? Oh, we just put her on the spot.
Well, all of this is hopefully with the opportunity to bring people more peace in their understandings, in their lives, and therefore in the greater reflection of reality. So there's certainly the gender issue. There's certainly how that relates to what we're seeing reflected.
Well, and the channel put it quite succinctly when he was talking about the dynamic of the increasing pressure that is being reflected to humanity because you are about to enter your adulthood as a species. And as Adrienne said earlier, the question ultimately is, are you going to begin to measure yourself by how well the least of you are doing and not the best of you? There is a discussion going on in your world right now about basic income and about caring for each other and all of that stuff, and the consensus that seems to be reflected from that possibility of that dynamic is that humanity is just going to lay around and get fat and not do anything and just be kind of slugs for your lives, because if you don't have to go out there and fight with each other, then what's going to give you motivation? And we would suggest to you that there is a whole lot of possibilities, because if you have a basic income, then you have your basic needs met: food, water, shelter, healthcare, and you can pursue whatever educational means you would wish, and you could grow in whatever ways you wish, because, dear ones, you are creatures of curiosity. You are creatures that always wish to grow. Your soul is in there, constantly kicking you in the butt, constantly moving you forward, constantly saying, wow, this is great, but maybe I could just be a little bit more. Maybe I could just become a little bit more. And so each of you, in your quest to become creators, even in your quest to become, what shall we say, masters of your reality, you face these certain obstacles that you have given yourself along the way. And when they are reflected to you within the dynamics of your collective reality, your consensus reality, then the energies that are asking to be dealt with become more and more imperative. So we'll be speaking to you on a weekly basis. We're only going to give you a little, unless Adrienne has something else for us right now.
No, I think we're probably good.
Right.
I could go on and on.
Oh, well, yes, of course you can. And all right, dear ones, we love you all so very, very much. We're going to turn you back to the channel until the next time we close, sending you peace, sending you happiness, and maybe giving you an understanding of that's the flock.
So we hope you feel bold enough to comment or send us questions. Certainly, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can like us, you can share us, you can subscribe, you can hit the bell so you get the updates.
And look for us on Facebook under peacegenesisproject.org. Look for SOTU if you're really interested in more of SOTU. Conversations with SOTU.org. If you're looking at this on YouTube, the links will be down at under the page. Under the movie, the whatever this is that we have just created. All right. So, till next time.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.